Okay, let's turn our attention now to more recent events in terms of archaeology in the Middle East. I'm going to tell you, I'll give you sort of a rough synopsis of some of the problems in Near Eastern archaeology in the past decade or so, which most of you know about. Although fieldwork is beginning again in Iraq and Mesopotamia proper, in just in different areas. But obviously, the first Gulf War and the Iraq War in 2003 um, ended with not just terrible loss of life, um, but also a lot of instability, and which resulted in damaging of archaeological sites and looting and things like that. So these are topics that um, are not just limited to the ancient Near East or to the Near East, I should say, but looting and destruction happen in other places as well. And archaeologists are getting better at documenting archaeological sites using the latest technology. So one of the things that I've been doing, I've been experimenting with a technology that's now become standard in archaeology. That is using drone pictures and software to create 3D replicas or 3D models of things. So, for example, I had a student that made a 3D model of the windmill in Holland, Michigan. Archaeologists are using this kind of technology to document and preserve archaeological sites, and they're also using satellite photos to monitor archaeological sites and monitor the effects of looting and destruction. Okay, so but this sort of raises several issues that people sort of focus on. For example, when ISIS was destroying several archaeological sites in Iraq and Syria, and we'll talk a little bit about that. When people would decry what they were doing, some people would say, well, shouldn't you be focusing on people instead of the artifacts? And so this choice that people sort of create or they state is kind of a false one. It's become sort of this, well, you can only do one. You can only save people or you can only save the archaeology. And if you focus any energy on saving artifacts and things like that, you're just diverting resources away from saving people. And you can do both. And unfortunately, at least in the Syrian civil war, the international community didn't do a good job on either of them. So it's not like people's focus on ancient artifacts and ancient sites was preventing the international community from doing a better job of saving people and saving victims as a result of that civil war. So it's not an either or choice. You can and you should do both. Many archaeologists believe, and others, people in those communities believe that the archaeology, and we'll see this as well, that archaeology should be saved and artifacts and sites should be preserved because it's part of the cultural patrimony of that nation. And it's something to sort of focus the national identity on. And so to many people within these communities as well, and in many respects their opinion is more important than the outside archaeologists, right? The artifacts and the archaeology are part of their heritage, and they should be preserved. And they can be preserved if many people work together. So I believe, I'm biased obviously being an archaeologist, that antiquities should be a priority. They should be preserved. The international community should do everything they can to preserve archaeological sites. But we see damage from military engagement. So for example, Babylon, U.S. soldiers unintentionally, I think, damaged portions of the site from parking tanks there and other military equipment. There's Syrian forces or Syrian government forces destroyed or damaged archaeological sites by digging into them to make them military places. Right? If you've got a tell's the high ground. It obviously becomes it always has been a strategic location because it's the high ground. It continues to remain a strategic location. So armies place emplacements there. Looting is obviously a big problem. And then there's intentional destruction. Why intentional destruction? About 2015 is when we really saw ISIS begin to intentionally destroy some of these archaeological sites. There was sort of the reason that they gave publicly, and then there was sort of probably the other things going on. ISIS said it was iconoclasm, that it was these were idols should not be worshipped, so they're destroying these idols. Many Islamic scholars pointed out that the destruction of idols in the Quran was destruction of idols that were being worshipped at that time, whereas the idols that were part of archaeological sites were not being worshipped anymore. They were thousands of years old in Islamic countries where Muslim was the dominant religion, and so there was no threat whatsoever of iconoclasm. And so ISIS was distorting Islamic teaching to justify what they were doing. Really had more to do with thumbing their nose at the West, because they knew that the West cared about these kinds of artifacts and sites. And it was sort of their way of saying to the West, we're going to do this, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And it was also part of cultural genocide, of destroying the history of a people and a nation, and trying to do what the Khmer Rouge did in Cambodia. Start completely over from a new, year one, which is what the Khmer Rouge did in Cambodia. With ISIS, it was the beginning of a new caliphate. We're starting completely over. There's also ISIS, as we'll see, they destroyed some large artifacts for show, to be videotaped or recorded and put on YouTube, and then they looted lots of smaller artifacts to sell to fund, purchase of weapons and things like that. It was never a big moneymaker for them, but they still did it anyway. Oil was a greater moneymaker. Right? Provocation of the West, etc. These were all some of the reasons cited. Now, based on international courts' findings of rebels in Mali, intentional destruction of cultural heritage is now considered an international war crime. So since that time, any group or rebel force, guerrilla force, governmental force that intentionally destroys cultural property can be held accountable as a war crime. One of the worst things to happen in Near Eastern archaeology, and I don't think I am overstating it, was the looting of the Iraq Museum in 2003. Now, this was a disaster on many, many levels. When I first saw the looting on TV and the apathy of Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense at that time, towards the looting, where he said, well, things break. Uh, Looting happens, anarchy happens during regime change. It's inevitable. At that point in my mind, I knew the rest of the war was not going to go well. I did not think it was a good idea to begin with. I did not support it. Right? Obviously, no one asked me whether I did or not. I mean, because I had no say in it. Very few people had any say in whether the war was going to happen or not. Congress people did, but many of them were too scared to stand up against George W. Bush. This is my opinion, obviously. I don't think many people today would say that it was a great decision in hindsight. But I had hopes that maybe it could be done well, and maybe not that many people would be killed, and maybe it would be over quickly. But when the museum was looted and not protected by U.S. soldiers who had seized Baghdad and who were obligated to protect the museum at that point, and who had been warned, the Pentagon had been warned by archaeologists. In fact, I talked to an archaeologist who was flown into the Pentagon to talk to military officials about what should be protected after Iraq was conquered by U.S. forces. And he showed them important archaeological sites, and he said the number one priority is the Baghdad Museum. And so that was not protected. It was looted by, we're not exactly sure of who was doing the looting. It was a collection of different people. Some were professional looters. Some were people who knew how to get rid of this stuff, how to sell it, how to smuggle it out of Iraq. Some were Iraqis who were just sort of swept up in the chaos. Some of it were Iraqis who saw the museum as a symbol of Saddam and the secular Ba'athist regime and wanted to attack it because they saw it as sort of a symbol of Saddam. And so what ended up happening was looting, taking out of artifacts, destruction of priceless artifacts. You can see from the royal cemeteries of Ur that all had to be patched up. The Uruk vase was broken, had to be restored. Some of the lions that we saw in that old Babylonian capital were destroyed. Many, many small objects were looted. Provenience information on cards and documents were burned. So once things were removed and then smuggled out, it was hard to track them down to their origins in the Baghdad Museum. Many thousands of things were recovered and returned. There was kind of an amnesty given to anyone who returned things. So many of the most priceless objects were recovered. Although I believe that the bust of Sargon that we looked at was never recovered. But not exactly sure about that. But after the museum was looted and you can see sort of the joking attitude of Secretary Rumsfeld. That's when I realized, boy, they really don't know what they're doing. Because if they sort of laugh about this kind of looting and don't actually have security within the capital, this is not going to go too well. And I think you could say pretty clearly that the war after 2003 didn't go well. It just turned into a long, prolonged guerrilla fight, urban conflict, many, many people dying. If you asked Iraqis, are they better off today than they were under Saddam? Many of them, I don't know exactly what they would say, but I think many of them would say, well, they're better under Saddam. They were bad off under Saddam, and they're pretty bad off today. And it's different, but it's not necessarily better. So the looting of the museum was one of the first indicators to many people, I believe, that the organization and prosecution of the war was not well planned or thought out. And so throughout that whole period from 2003 really up until recently, archaeological sites were looted. Again, some people think that the looting was directed overseas by, for example, antiquities dealers in other countries who would contact local people and tell them where to go, or local people who knew kind of what to do. And so archaeological sites, like here you could see Isin, all of these holes are looters' holes. People looting the site looking for cuneiform tablets, cylinder seals, unbroken pottery. Those are the things that are small, could be easily smuggled out, and could fetch a good price on the antiquities market. It's only been recently that I think eBay has stopped the sale of cylinder seals on eBay. But for a while, during the Iraq War, it was very easy to sell cylinder seals looted from Iraq on eBay. You can see some of the damage that has been done to some of these sites. It looks like Swiss cheese. And that's all from recent looting. Some of these sites, some archaeologists say, have been so damaged that they're unsalvageable, right? That you can't excavate them anymore because things are so torn up and disturbed. You won't be able to put anything in context, and lots of things have been taken out of the site. Here you can see all the pockmarks on this site. So during the early 2000s and then 2010 to the present time, 40 to 60% of sites dating to the Old Babylonian period had been looted. 155 million square feet of ground of the sites were affected. Sites dating to 1700 BC, 63% of those sites were looted. Unfortunately, if looters are digging and they're turning up cuneiform tablets, many of those cuneiform tablets were air dried, were never baked in the kiln. Once they're exposed to air and any kind of moisture, they will decompose and they will be gone. So I'll show you a few sites that archaeologists have been monitoring these sites from not only aerial photos but also satellite photos. So satellite imagery has become an important tool for cultural management. And now there are many international groups that work on cultural preservation and monitoring of important cultural sites using satellite photos. So that might be a career path for some of you. Some of you who are interested in cultural preservation might be interested in working for an organization that uses technology to then alert authorities in different countries as to potential looting. Right? During Europus in Syria on the Euphrates, you can see very heavily looted. This is a Roman period site that has one of the oldest synagogues ever excavated. Palmyra, I think I talked about Palmyra very early on in the class. This is an Roman period Arab caravan trading city that had temples dedicated to the pagan Arab gods of that time period, like Bel, which is essentially a version of Baal, and a mixture of different cultural styles. There was looting, as you can see, by Syrian government forces, and then there was intentional destruction by ISIS, as you can see here, and you can see some of the damage by ISIS. They also used the theater for executions, unfortunately. This is one of the most famous scenes in Palmyra. Unfortunately, this arch also destroyed by ISIS. And the Syrian archaeologist who made Palmyra his life, who dedicated his life to the study of Palmyra and worked there for 40 years. Died essentially a martyr. Khaled al-Assad refused to tell ISIS where treasures from tombs that had been excavated were kept. They threatened to kill him if he didn't reveal the location of these antiquities, and he refused and was executed by ISIS. So very much regarded as a hero by many, many people. And, a very important Syrian archaeologist. So it was during this time also that ISIS laid dynamite under some of those Assyrian capitals, some of those palaces like Nineveh and Khorsabad, and destroyed some of the stone sculptures that were still remaining there. And again, they did this as a demonstration, as a show to the rest of the world. They also destroyed some Muslim shrines, believe it or not, that they thought were heretical, Yazidi shrines, Christian, Jewish shrines within those territories. So during all this is when we start to see more and more organizations like the Syrian Heritage Initiative to try and keep track of all the things that were going on and try and preserve things as best they could. Right? So these are just some of the different websites like Cultural Heritage Resource, the Ancient Middle East Educational and Research Institute, right? And they also do a good job of promoting understanding and education about the Middle East to other parts of the world. And then finally, I'd say there's a important controversy still as to whether artifacts that were dug up by archaeologists in the 1800s, early 1900s, and brought back to the Louvre and the British Museum and the Berlin Museum, like you saw with the Ishtar Gates, whether they should be returned to the countries where they were brought out from. Right, and there's obviously different opinions on both sides, and there's a lot of debate today about it. Now, looting can be decreased and it can be prevented if international organizations and countries work together. And this is where UNESCO can be an important organization, tries to at least assert some authority in the prevention of looting and damaging of archaeological sites. Well, this is where we'll stop for this final week. Again, I hope you enjoyed the class. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you gained an appreciation for, many of you have already probably had an appreciation for the cultures of the ancient Middle East. And hopefully I enhanced this appreciation. And enhanced your knowledge of the ancient Middle East and sort of enlarged your thinking about not just the ancient Near East, but ancient humans and modern cultures in general. So hopefully our paths will cross sometime in the near future. Hopefully I'll be able to work on projects with some of you in the future. To those of you who are graduating, congratulations, and best of luck with the next step. But you deserve to celebrate your achievement in graduating. And for those of you who are not graduating, celebrate your completion of the semester. And again, I hope you guys have a good summer, and hopefully we'll see some of you in the near future.